I think he's dead wrong. It's the Americans who can't be trusted. If you look at the 17 June Memorandum of Understanding, and the key issue here involves Article 5, who controls the Strait of Hormuz. In my opinion, Article 5 makes it clear that it is Iran that will be in control of the Strait of Hormuz for the 60-day negotiating period. And after that, the future of the strait will be decided between Oman on one side and Iran on the other side. The United States is not mentioned at all. And what the Trump administration tried to do after the Memorandum of Understanding was signed was create a channel in the Gulf, or to put it more specifically, to create a channel in the Strait of Hormuz that basically was American controlled and would allow ships to go through under the auspices of the United States and outside the auspices of the Iranians. And unsurprisingly, the Iranians said this was unacceptable and that it was a violation of Article 5 of the Memorandum of Understanding. The Iranians are correct. What that gentleman just said on Fox News is simply not true.
And so what about his comment there that we should be encouraged that President Trump has a resolution to this? So even though Iran is not doing what we want them to, forget about what the MOU actually said, but don't worry because we have escalation dominance. Do we?
Well, you want to remember that President Trump signed the Memorandum of Understanding on June 17th because he had no choice. The Iranians were winning the war, and the Iranians held all the cards when you went up the escalation ladder. And this is why President Trump signed what was effectively a surrender document. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is what's changed since June 17th that now gives us escalation dominance? I mean, if we had had escalation dominance before June 17th, we would have taken advantage of that. And we would have used it to make sure we got a better agreement. The fact that we didn't take advantage of it meant we didn't have escalation dominance before June 17th. So the argument here is that something has changed. Well, I'd like to know what is that something that has changed. According to my calculations, we've been engaged in this tit-for-tat strategy since July 7th. Again, the Memorandum of Understanding was signed June 17th. We then welched on the deal, and you got this tit-for-tat strategy starting on July 7th, which is now taking place. And it does not look like we have gained any coercive leverage over Iran as a result of that tit-for-tat strategy. They are matching us at every turn and causing us huge trouble in the Gulf. We don't have escalation dominance. Now, is the administration saying that we can escalate further? We can go beyond tit for tat, maybe go back to the 40-day war, which was a real strategic bombing campaign that took place between February 28th and April 8th. We can go back to that and we'll win that conflict? I don't think so. There's no evidence we can do that. And there's no evidence that continuing tit for tat, even at a higher level, is going to produce the desired outcome for the United States. The fact is, we have no choice but to reach some sort of memorandum of understanding with the Iranians and put an end to this.
Financially, what has changed from June 17th to today when you see what we're actually paying?
What has happened is the situation has gotten much worse economically. And the key factor here is the fact that the Houthis have shut down the Red Sea. They now make it impossible for Saudi Arabia to ship its oil through Bab el-Mandab Strait. And this is going to have significant negative effects on the price of oil and therefore on the international economy. This is, in my opinion, a disastrous situation. The Strait of Hormuz is shut down, and now the Bab el-Mandab Strait is shut down. So economically, we're worse off today than we were right after June 17th. Second point I'd make to you, Danny, is, as you know, one of the reasons that we wanted to reach an agreement with the Iranians is that we were running out of precious munitions. This is one of the reasons that we ended our war against the Houthis in the spring of 2025. It's one of the reasons that we were so anxious to end the 12-day war against Iran last June. This is June 2025. It's one of the reasons that we wanted to stop the 40-day war, as I said. And as you engage in a tit-for-tat strategy, you're using up more precious ammunitions. So for those people who talk about escalating now, you want to remember that what we're going to do is burn up even more precious munitions. So from that point of view, as well as from the economic point of view, it makes no sense for us to up the ante or to continue the status quo with regard to this tit-for-tat strategy. What we should do, if we were smart, is cut a deal. Well, the American intelligence community has made it clear that as a result of the 40-day war, Iran was left with a substantial number of missiles and drones, and they're continuing to replenish their capability when it comes to missiles and drones. So there's no evidence that I know of that Iran is running out of missiles and drones. I mean, people like Greenway can make these assertions, but you have to back these assertions up with facts. You have to be able to show us the evidence that Iran is running out of missiles and drones. In fact, what we see with our own eyes is exactly the opposite of what he says. One more point on this, Danny. He talks about how President Trump is going to up the ante. We're going to escalate, and that's going to, provide the magic formula. But it's easy to say things like that. Please tell us what your theory of victory is. Tell us exactly what we're going to do when we escalate. What targets are we going to hit? And what effect is hitting those targets going to have on the Iranians? Nobody ever tells us that story because, in fact, there's no story to be told. What targets can we hit that will make a difference? The answer is none. If there were those targets, we would have hit them a long time ago. It's not like we've just been waiting for the right moment to hit the targets and bring the Iranians to their knees. This is a ludicrous argument. There is no set of targets that we can hit that will coerce the Iranians into surrendering. It's not going to happen. They are facing an existential threat. They're going to fight to the death. And they have lots of capability to do that. We are in a losing war. And again, this is why President Trump signed the Memorandum of Understanding on June 17th. And as I said before, nothing has changed since then. There's no magic formula available today that was not available on June 17th. Well, he's going to have to cut a deal. And what he's going to try to do is convince people that it was the Iranians who wanted to go back to the negotiating table and that he's accommodating them. This is reflected in Rubio's rhetoric, which of course is rhetoric the president uses all the time. What we're saying here is that it's the Iranians who want to go back to the negotiating table. Why are they pounding on that message? It's because we want to go back to the negotiating table, but we don't want to be seen as the one that's desperate to get back to the negotiating table. Then we'll go back to the negotiating table and we'll spin whatever agreement is reached as a great victory. Trump, of course, tried to do this on June 17th. But he couldn't convince the hawks of that, and they basically pushed him to welch on the deal. This time, I think Trump's going to get a worse deal than he got on June 17th. Because again, as I said before, the Iranians have more coercive leverage the longer this war goes on. So the second time you go to the negotiating process, they're going to have more leverage. They're going to drive a tougher bargain. So he's going to have a more difficult time trying to convince people that this is not another surrender document. In other words, an even worse surrender document. But he'll try to do that. He'll try to say, we've put an end to the war. We've solved the economic crisis, and we're going to live happily ever after. Will he be able to sell that? I doubt it, but he'll try.
You know what it appears to me is, and as you're talking here, I'm kind of connecting some dots potentially, that maybe that is why he's saying that. That's why Rubio was saying that, but that he's like, all right, to sell that, I first have to do one more big push. And that could be the reason why Jack Keane said this.
We are on a definite path to return to major combat operations that would involve Israel and the United States. I think that is the path we're on. Is there some negotiations that the Iranians want to do here? Of course, they want to negotiate. Why now? They want to negotiate because they want to stop the United States from imposing their will by firing on them and taking away their military capabilities. They want to stop that, as they did successfully back on April the 7th and April the 8th. They want to replay that. I don't believe that's going to happen. Pakistanis and Qataris are supporting him on that, but I don't think that's where the president is and his team around him. I believe where they are frustrated, they want to get the Straits of Hormuz eventually open and also return to major combat operations and finish what they started out to do in terms of assigned military objectives.
Now, you pointed out a second ago, I don't have to ask you the same question twice, all these expansive list of objectives and things Jack Keane thinks we can accomplish. He doesn't ever provide a path to how we're going to get that done when it all failed during the first phase of this war, which you so clearly articulated last time with the 40-day bombing phase, the blockade phase, and then the MOU phase. And now then we're trying to find a new phase, I guess. But do you think that it's possible that President Trump is putting out stuff like this, and like what Greenway said, and like what Keith Kellogg said also, that we want to try one more big push, and then we can somehow claim after the smoke clears that we caused Iran to make a deal?
Could be the case, Danny. I wouldn't be surprised. They're desperate, and they're looking. I think they're looking for a way to end this war, yet be able to spin a story that we prevailed, the Iranians didn't prevail. And you could make an argument that what they're trying to do, and I'm not saying there's a lot of hard evidence to support this. This is, based on deduction by you and me. You could make a case that they're setting up a story that says that it's the Iranians who want to go back to the negotiating table. They're desperate. Enormous damage has been done to them. And then what we do is we go out and we slam them over the next couple days. And then we, in effect, declare victory and say, we're ready now to go back to the negotiating table. And we hope that the Iranians feel the time is here to negotiate another memorandum of understanding. And then that deal is done. And then we say, it's not a surrender document. We actually prevailed. And the reason we prevailed is we got tough with the Iranians. And we were probably overly patient, but nevertheless, we, in the end, brought down the hammer on them and they conceded. That's a plausible way of getting out of it from their perspective. The question is whether they can convince the rest of us that this is what really happened. And I think that's going to be almost impossible to do. They'll try to tell a story that we won, but I don't think that you can tell that story. When you go down what the list of demands were going into this war, and the fact that we didn't achieve any of them, and then you look at the other downsides that have resulted from this war, what the world looked like on February 27th compared to today. Forget the demands we made, just, who controls the Strait of Hormuz, what's happened to our basing structure in the Gulf, what's happened to our alliance structure in the Gulf, what's happened to our munitions supply, and so forth and so on. This is really a devastating defeat for the United States. How can anybody miss that? But they'll try to spin a story, assuming we're correct in what they're up to, that portrays us as the winners and the Iranians as the losers.